is Lawrence from Silicon Valley High School. This video we will discuss the concept of command line arguments in Java. Command line arguments is another way to accept inputs via command line by using the public static void MainStringargs parameter. Okay, let me open sample code to show you how it's done. Okay. We're going to execute this set of codes via command line and via Eclipse. Okay, so in line 1, I have a class called Commandline args1. Then of course I have my PSVM method, my public static void main. And in my main method, I have an argument called string args. Args is actually a variable that represents an array of string values. Now, these string values can come from the inputs that can be passed via command line. Now, let me open the terminal window. If you're using Windows, well, you can open up command com. Right, let me just put this here and let me go inside my folder. Right, so you will see here command line args1.java. So this is the file. Okay, so if I'm going to compile this via command line, the command will be javac and then the name of the file, command line arg1.java. Enter. Now, you see that there's no compilation error. Just to verify, we will see the Java bytecode file command line arg1.class. Now, in order for us to run this file via command line, we type in the command java and then followed by the file name. Alright, and then after the file name, we can now, any value that you pass after the file name are now considered as command line arguments. Let's try passing 3 values. Let's say 1, 2, and 3. So when I press enter, you see that all the values that I passed after the file name were printed. This is because in lines 5, 6, and 7, you'll see that I'm using system.out.println arg0, which refers to the first command line, and then followed by args1, which refers to the second command line. And of course, the third one, args2, will also be printed. Now, if I try to pass another value after the first 3 values, of course, you will not see the fourth value because we only hard-coded args0, 1, and 2 to be printed. In a way, our code is not a very flexible code because you've already hard-coded that, hey, I can only accept 3 values here. Also, another thing to consider is when you pass command line arguments, you're supposed to pass 3 values right here, and these 3 values must be space separated values. So if there's a need for you to include a space inside the string, let's say I'll type here 2, and I would like to group these 2 strings as a single string. Okay, let's see what will happen if we press enter. You'll see in the output that this will be treated as args0, this one is args1, and this one is args2 because you have a space in between 2 and 2. This one is not printed. So in order for you to group these 2 together, you may want to put them inside a pair of double quotes. So if I press enter, you'll see that this is arg0 and this is args1 treated as a single string because they are inside a pair of double quotes. And then this is args2. Alright? Now, so the question here is, how can we come up with a code that will accept any amount of arguments via command line? In this example that you're seeing right now, we can only pass 3 values. So if we try to pass 4 values, the fourth one will not be printed. Or if we try to pass one or only two values, an exception will occur. Now, when you encounter an exception called ArrayIndexOutOfBoundsException, it simply means that you're trying to access an array element that is beyond the limit, that is out of bounds. Because in this example, you have two arguments, arg0 and args1. Let us recall the concept of arrays. Arrays in Java are dynamic, meaning they can be created only at runtime. So when we press the enter key here, the args array, which happens to be an array of string, was created and it only contains two elements. So when you attempted to print the third element using line 7's system.out.println args2, you'll see that in line 7 there's an error called Commandline ArrayIndexOutOfBoundsException, and that is found under Commandline args1 line 7, because in a way args2 is not really created. So in this next sample code right here, I've created two versions of a for loop that will iterate through the list of arguments that is passed via command line, which is args, which represents an array of string. There are two versions right here. First one, I'm using a traditional for loop. Since args is an array of string, there's an attribute called .length. So calling args.length will give me the number of arguments that you pass via command line. And with the way the traditional for loop works, we'll iterate from index 0 all the way up to args I less than args.length, and then we can actually print the value as we loop through it. So let me compile command line args2.java. Then if we try to pass values, let's say 1, 2, then 3, space, 3, 4, you'll see that any amount of values that you pass via command line is now printed every time you run it. If you try to pass a single value, single command line argument, it will be printed. If you try to pass nothing, well, in this example, args.length will be equal to 0. It will print nothing. Also, we can make use of what we call the enhanced for loop right here. Now, the enhanced for loop was introduced in the previous video. Okay? This one, on the right-hand side of the column, is the name of your array, while on the right-hand side is a name of your temporary variable, which is called S, and S will have the value of each element that args has. So every time you iterate through the array of args, S will get a hold of each element. So if we compile this again, let's say Java C command line args2 version 2.java, and then if we run it again, we can now pass same thing. We're going to get the same output. Okay. Can we pass numeric values? Of course. But these numeric values will be treated as strings. So if you try to perform, let's say, if you try to pass values that are numeric format, it's all right to pass them, but take note that you cannot perform any mathematical operation on these values because they are accepted by a variable called args, which is an array of string. In other words, if you want to, let's say, compute for the average or for the sum of the values that you pass via command line, you need to perform some extra conversion. These are the parse methods. Okay, so we have 8 primitive data types. You have the byte, short, int, long for integral types, float and double for floating points, char, and boolean. 7 of them have wrapper classes that contains what we call the parse methods. So in this first version, string str1 equals 100. Now the 100 value here is of type string, and it has a numeric format. It's a whole number format value, so if you want to convert them into a byte, we need to use byte.parseByte and then simply pass the value of str to parseByte. So B here will now be equal to 100 of type byte. Same thing will happen with short. You can use short.parseShort. Integer, use integer.parseInt. And then long is equal to, you use long.parseLong. So these variables b, s, I, and lo will now contain 100 as their numeric equivalent. For floating points or fractional values, we also have parse methods for them. So in this example, I have string str2 equals 123.45, which is a fractional value. If I want to get the floating point equivalent of this string formatted value, I should say float.parseFloat and then pass the variable str2 to parseFloat. If you want a double version of that, you should say double.parseDouble. Take note, we do not have car.parseCar. Okay, but we do have something for Boolean. Let's say string str3 equals true, and since this is a Boolean value, but that needs to be converted into its Boolean version, we need to use the wrapper class Boolean. Okay, so we have Boolean.parseBoolean. So the value of BO variable here will now be Boolean true. All right. Now we're going to use one of these parse methods in the next example. In this version, I will accept values via command line and then compute for the sum of each value using integer.parseInt and then get the average. Now take note that when we divide an integer, which is sum is an integer, and you divide it by another integer, you're supposed to get an integer result. That's why in the numerator, we decided to cast sum into a double so that we can get the fractional version of this. So let's take a look at the runtime, Commandline rx3.java. Let's compile it first and then run it, Commandline rx3. So when we pass, say 100, 200, and 300, there you go. The sum is 600 and the average is 200.0. Let's try to pass a fourth value. This time let's pass 4. So that would be 604 and the average is 151.0. Still no floating point. Let me pass, say 3, and you'll see that we already have a fractional value for the average. Okay. Take note that we can use either the traditional for loop or the enhanced for loop for this example, as long as when you iterate, you need to use the parse methods to convert them into their numeric equivalent, because whatever values that you pass via command line, whether you pass a Boolean value or a floating point value or an integral value, all of them will be treated as string values because of public static void MainStringargs. Now, you might ask, is it okay to change this to public static void main int args? Right? Now, let's try to create a new code. Public class command line 4, and then let's put public static void main string args. All right, system.out.println. Let's print out the first argument. Now, if I'll try to change this to int args, and I save this, command line 4.java. Let me save it under svhs. There you go. Command line args. Let's change this to command line args version 4. Right, save. Or let me change this args. Okay. If we attempt to compile this, we will get a positive compilation. Alright, so you'll notice that when I check the files, I will still have the Java source code and the compiled version. However, when I try to run the version 4 and I try to pass, say, 100, I will get a runtime error because it cannot find public static void main string args. This means that every time you run your code, the first thing that the virtual machine looks for is the public static void main string args method. what we have is int args, not string args. So technically speaking, you cannot, this code will compile, but you cannot run anything from it. So it's better to change this back to string, and then this time, when you compile this again, voila. And when you pass a value here, they're simply printing it. Now, the question is, how do we run this if we're using Eclipse? Can we pass command line arguments in Eclipse? Let's try that out. Let me open Eclipse. I'm using Eclipse Oxygen. And let's try to create, let's launch our workspace. Here we go. Give it a second to load. There we go. Let's try to create a new project, new Java project. Let's call this project as Commandline project. Okay, let's use the default setting, next, and then there you go, Commandline project. Let's allow output folders for source. Output folders for source folders. Hold on, give me 1 second. Let's allow the output folder bin, right? And then click on finish. All right. Now let's create our first Java source code. Okay, Java class. Now in this class, let me give it a package test. Let's call the class name as Commandline version 1. Let's include the main method so that we don't have to type it anymore. All right. Okay, let's use the shortcut sysout. Okay, let's print args0, then perform a quick copy paste maneuver here, and let's try to print the first 3 arguments, args0, args1, and args2. Now if we save this and we right click on this and run it as an application immediately, we will get an ArrayIndexOutOfBoundsException right there in line 7, right about here, because we were not able to pass any command line arguments. All right, so if you want to pass command line arguments in your code in Eclipse, so you right click on your code, look for run as, and then there's the run configuration part here, no? So let's click this one, run configuration, and then in the tabs that you'll see here, you can see that you have arguments. And then you can put in some program arguments that say, let's pass 1, double quote 2, 2, and 3. So click on apply so that it will save it right there, and then click on run, and there you go. Okay, oops, I think we need to fix that one. Run as configuration. All right, let's try that again. Let's try to pass 3 values only, 1, 2, and 3. Okay, so save it and then run it right there. Okay, now let's try another version. This time let's try to pass values, numeric values, and then let's create a code that will pass numeric values and compute for the average of the values that was passed. So let's create a new Java class. Okay, let's use a different package, test package. Let's give it a different package name. And then Commandline version 2. Let's create the PSVM method. Finish. Right, here we go. Okay. let's use a for loop that will allow us to iterate through the argument list. I would say int I is equal to 0. Let me just enlarge that. And then I less than args dot. We have the dot length right here. And then I plus plus. Okay. Now, before we put anything here, we need to have a variable called int sum that will store the total values as you iterate through your array, and then double average. Let's put an initial value 0.0 right there. So as you iterate, you can say sum plus equals integer dot parse int, then we pass args sub I. We can use this shorthand operator, or you can use the longhand version. Okay, so it depends what version you would really like to use. Okay, but I would stick with the shorthand version. So as I loop through my arguments, I'm actually computing for the sum. And then when I'm done computing for the sum, I can now compute for my average, which is equivalent to sum divided by args dot length. Okay, but we know that sum is declared as an integer, and you're dividing it with another integer, okay, args dot length. In order for us to get the exact fractional value, we need to perform a cast. And then let's try to print it. System.out.println. Okay, we say here sum, right, plus sum, and sysout. We'll say average, okay, plus average. All right, here we go. Let's save our work. Right click on this, run as, run configuration. Let's try to pass. Okay, so in this example, the project that was highlighted is Commandline project, and the main class that is currently set up is Commandline version 1, okay, which was our old code. But since we have written a new code, we need to change this to version 2. Let's choose Commandline version 2. Okay, be sure that your main class right here matches the correct file. And then look for the arguments, and you can start passing values on your program arguments. Click on apply and then run. There we go. So this is the output that you got from your command line argument. Let's run that again one more time. Configuration. This time let's try to pass 4 values, say 41. Apply, run. So there you go. You got a floating point value. Let's try to right click and run this. Okay, run application without going through the run configuration. Let's see what happens. Okay, so before, without putting any argument list, we cannot just directly right click and then run as, because we haven't put any command line arguments. But now, since we've already placed some configurations on our argument list, and then when we click apply, it will actually save this on the configuration setup of Eclipse. So every time we run this file, it will assume that the values that you place right here are the command line arguments that you want to use, right about here. So in an event, oops, sorry, let me just go back there. So in an event, where's that? That you wanted to change any of the values here, you can do so by passing another set of values. So here we go. I'll click on apply and then click on run. So there we go. Alright? So I hope you enjoyed the video that I've created for you. If you have any questions, feel free to drop me a message at the Silicon Valley chat box. And I'll see you on the next lesson. Happy coding!